Some people are not afraid of failure. They are afraid of discovering they no longer believe in themselves anymore. And slowly, without realizing it, that fear begins controlling their entire life. A man sits in his car outside an opportunity he once prayed for, convincing himself not to walk inside. A woman smiles during conversations while secretly wondering if anyone would still love her if they truly knew how exhausted she feels internally. Someone wakes up every morning already emotionally tired before the day even begins. And year after year, people lose battles nobody else can see. Not because life destroyed them instantly, but because fear weakened them gradually. Overthinking drained them quietly. Self-doubt poisoned their decisions repeatedly. Most people think war looks like violence, chaos, destruction. But the most dangerous wars are often invisible. They happen silently inside the human mind. And eventually, if a person never learns how to master themselves internally, life begins controlling them externally. Because every great battle in life is first won or lost inside the mind. Some people have spent so many years fighting themselves internally that they no longer remember what peace feels like. Their mind never truly rests. Even during quiet moments there is tension, fear, noise, endless thinking. A man lies awake at 2 in the morning replaying conversations from years ago, wondering if he failed people he loved. A woman stares at her reflection before leaving the house, silently questioning whether she is enough while nobody around her notices the battle happening behind her eyes. Someone receives an opportunity they once prayed for, but instead of excitement, fear immediately whispers every possible reason they might fail. And this is how countless people slowly become prisoners to their own thoughts. Not through dramatic collapse, but through repeated emotional defeats nobody else can see. Most people believe their greatest enemy is outside of them. Difficult people, circumstances, rejection, failure. But often the real enemy is internal. It is the voice convincing them not to try. The fear convincing them to stay small. The emotional wounds quietly distorting how they see themselves and everyone around them. Because fear rarely announces itself openly. It disguises itself as comfort, as procrastination, as waiting for the perfect time, as overthinking disguised as preparation. And slowly life begins passing people by while they remain trapped inside invisible mental prisons built from fears they never confronted honestly. The frightening part is that people eventually adapt to emotional exhaustion. Survival mode starts feeling normal. Stress becomes identity. Anxiety becomes routine. Emotional heaviness becomes personality. And eventually, people stop recognizing themselves anymore. Deep down many know something is wrong. They feel disconnected from themselves. Disconnected from purpose. Disconnected from peace. But no amount of distraction truly fixes it. Endless scrolling does not fix it. Constant entertainment does not fix it. Temporary validation does not fix it. Because internal wars follow people everywhere they go. Some people move cities hoping to escape themselves, only to discover their mind traveled with them. Others chase success believing achievement will finally quiet their insecurity, only to discover insecurity survives inside luxury too. Because external victories mean very little when someone is still losing internally every single day. And maybe that is the saddest part of all. Some people spend their entire life trying to escape pain, without realizing the real prison was never outside of them. It was the war happening silently inside their own mind. But awareness changes everything. The moment someone begins observing their thoughts instead of automatically obeying them, the war starts shifting. They begin realizing not every fear tells the truth. Not every emotion deserves control. Not every thought deserves obedience. And slowly, for the first time in years, they begin reclaiming themselves from the patterns that once controlled their entire life. One of the saddest realities in modern life is how many people are silently breaking apart while appearing completely functional on the outside. There are individuals smiling in photographs while internally exhausted beyond words. People succeeding professionally while emotionally collapsing privately. Men who appear strong in public but secretly feel emotionally numb because they spent years suppressing pain nobody ever taught them how to process. Women carrying emotional pressure for so long that they no longer remember what true rest even feels like anymore. Modern life has created millions of people who look alive externally while slowly disappearing internally. And what makes this even more dangerous is that the human mind adapts to dysfunction. People become familiar with sadness, familiar with fear, familiar with loneliness, familiar with emotional chaos, familiar with self-hatred. Over time they begin accepting unhealthy mental states as permanent identity instead of temporary conditions that can actually change. Someone betrayed repeatedly begins expecting betrayal everywhere. Someone criticized constantly begins attacking themselves internally long before anyone else can. Someone who failed in the past starts approaching every future opportunity already emotionally defeated. And eventually people stop fighting for peace because deep down they no longer believe peace belongs to them anymore. The terrifying part is that many people do not even realize how much their inner voice shapes their reality. A person who constantly tells themselves they are not enough begins walking through life expecting rejection before rejection even happens. Someone who secretly believes they will fail starts sabotaging opportunities before they truly begin. Thoughts repeated long enough slowly become identity. And identity shapes behavior. That is why emotionally exhausted people often feel trapped even when the door was never locked. Their mind convinced them freedom was impossible long before life actually did. But the human mind is powerful in both directions. The same mind capable of trapping someone in fear is also capable of rebuilding them through awareness, discipline, and emotional honesty. The problem is that rebuilding requires confrontation. It requires people to stop running from themselves. And most avoid that for years because silence is uncomfortable. Silence forces honesty. Silence forces people to sit alone with thoughts they spent their entire life trying to outrun. Why do I constantly seek validation? Why am I terrified of failure? Why do I sabotage relationships when people get too close? Why do I feel exhausted even when life looks successful externally? Those questions hurt because they expose wounds people learn to hide instead of heal. But healing begins the moment someone stops pretending they are okay when they are not. Pretending only delays transformation. Real growth begins when someone becomes brave enough to confront their own mind honestly. And that honesty changes everything. Suddenly anger is no longer just anger. It becomes exposed as unresolved pain. Insecurity becomes exposed as emotional conditioning. Overthinking becomes exposed as fear disguised as preparation. And once people begin seeing their patterns clearly, those patterns slowly begin losing power over them. That is the beginning of freedom. Not external freedom. Internal freedom. The kind of freedom that allows someone to walk through life without constantly being controlled by fear, insecurity, emotional chaos, or the opinions of everyone around them. There comes a moment in many people's lives where they realize they cannot keep fighting themselves forever. Usually life forces this realization through pain. A relationship falls apart because someone never learned how to communicate honestly. A man sits alone in his apartment after losing someone he loved, finally realizing pride and emotional avoidance slowly destroyed the relationship long before the breakup happened. A woman spends years taking care of everyone else until one day she looks in the mirror and no longer recognizes herself anymore. Someone achieves the success they spent years chasing, only to discover achievement never healed the emptiness underneath. Pain has a strange way of exposing truth. It strips away illusions. It reveals emotional weaknesses people spent years trying to ignore. And while painful, these moments often become the beginning of transformation. Because suffering forces questions comfort never does. A person sitting alone after failure begins asking themselves who they truly became. Someone emotionally exhausted from carrying invisible pain finally asks why they abandoned themselves for so long. And slowly, through enough pain, enough reflection, enough honesty, people begin realizing something powerful: the war was never truly against the world. It was against the fear, insecurity, ego, emotional impulsiveness, and unresolved wounds living inside them the entire time. And once someone understands this, life begins changing quietly. They stop reacting emotionally to everything. They stop allowing temporary feelings to control permanent decisions. They stop abandoning themselves every time life becomes difficult. Instead of running from discomfort, they begin learning from it. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" they begin asking, "What is this trying to teach me?" That shift changes everything because it transforms pain from meaningless suffering into growth. The strongest people are not people who never feel fear. They are people who learned how to move forward despite fear. The people who remain calm while others panic. The people who think clearly while emotions scream for control. The people who respond wisely instead of destructively. That strength is not built during easy seasons. It is built during heartbreak. During uncertainty. During failure. During moments where life feels unbearably heavy and someone decides not to emotionally collapse. And eventually, after enough battles, people begin realizing something beautiful. Surviving pain did not weaken them the way they feared. It strengthened them in ways they never expected. Some people become wiser because suffering taught them compassion. Others become emotionally resilient because life forced them to stop depending on temporary comfort. And slowly they begin understanding that healing does not mean becoming fearless. It means finally refusing to let fear make every decision for them anymore. Eventually a person reaches a point where they understand that peace does not come from controlling life. Life will always remain unpredictable. Plans fail. People disappoint you. Pain arrives without warning. But true peace comes from learning how to remain emotionally steady even when life becomes chaotic. It comes from knowing that regardless of what happens externally, you built enough awareness, resilience, and discipline to protect your own mind. That changes how people move through life. They stop chasing constant validation because they no longer need approval to feel valuable. They stop comparing themselves obsessively because they understand everyone is carrying invisible struggles. They stop reacting emotionally to every criticism because they realize not every opinion deserves access to their peace. And perhaps most importantly, they stop abandoning themselves during difficult seasons. Most people become cruel to themselves precisely when they need compassion the most. They attack themselves internally with shame, hopelessness, and self-hatred during moments where healing is needed. Emotionally strong people learn a different approach. They hold themselves accountable without destroying their self-worth. They acknowledge mistakes without turning those mistakes into identity. They understand failure is an event, not a definition. And because of that mindset, they recover faster from setbacks. Over time this creates something rare in modern society: inner clarity. Clarity allows someone to recognize manipulation because fear no longer controls perception. Clarity allows healthier relationships because they stop expecting other people to heal wounds they refuse to confront themselves. Clarity allows someone to face uncertainty without collapsing psychologically. And eventually, after enough reflection and enough growth, a person begins realizing that the greatest victory in life is not domination over others. It is mastery over yourself. Mastery over your reactions. Your emotions. Your fears. Your impulses. Because once someone learns how to govern themselves internally, life loses much of its power to control them externally. And one day, almost without realizing when it happened, the person who once felt mentally trapped begins experiencing something unfamiliar. Peace. Not because life suddenly became easy, but because internally, they finally stopped fighting themselves. And maybe that is what freedom truly is. Not escaping life's difficulties, but escaping the war inside yourself that made every difficulty feel impossible to survive. Most people spend their entire life trying to conquer the world, while never learning how to conquer themselves. But the greatest battle you will ever fight is not against life. It is against the fear, insecurity, emotional chaos, and unconscious patterns quietly controlling your decisions every single day. And the moment you begin observing your mind instead of blindly obeying it, everything begins changing. Some of you listening tonight are far stronger than you realize. You survived moments that once felt impossible. You carried invisible pain while still continuing forward. And even now, despite everything you have been through, there is still a part of you searching for peace instead of surrender. Protect that part of yourself. Because your mind can either become the prison that destroys your future, or the weapon that rebuilds your life. And maybe peace was never about escaping life. Maybe it was about finally escaping the war inside yourself.